Today, we're jumping into this absolutely massive story of transformation, the making of modern Asia. We're going to trace this incredible journey all the way from ancient societies to the rise of powerful empires, and then see how the fight against those empires sparked the movements that literally shaped the world we know today. So, here's our roadmap for this whole story. First up, we'll look at the ancient foundations of Asia. Then, we'll dive into the age of empires, how they started, and the tools they used to stay in power. After that, we get to the fight for freedom, and we'll wrap up by looking at the legacies, all the stuff this history left behind. Okay, so before we can even talk about empires, we have to understand what was there before, to really grasp the huge scale of the changes that were coming. We're talking about a world that was already incredibly rich and complex, long before any Western ships showed up. And it really all begins with a simple but super powerful idea: peopling. It sounds kind of academic, right? But it's basically just about how different groups of people came to live in this place. This is the process that created this amazing, patchwork of cultures all across the region. So how did this all go down? Well, experts actually have a couple of big theories. You've got Peter Bellwood, who thinks people came from the mainland, and then Wilhelm Solheim, who argues they came from the islands. But honestly, at the end of the day, no matter which path they took, the result was the same. You get these amazing, distinct cultures popping up, like the Malay and Polynesian peoples. And get this, one of the biggest things connecting all these different groups was language. We're talking about the Austronesian language family, which is, by the way, the largest in the entire world. It's just incredible proof of how connected these early peoples were, sharing words across thousands of miles of ocean. And I really want to stress this. These were not simple primitive societies, not at all. They had really sophisticated social structures, like the barangay in the Philippines. And their world was deeply spiritual too. They had complex beliefs like animism and this whole pantheon of gods and goddesses, from a top god, Bathala, to Mandarangan, the god of war. But this complex and ancient world was about to be turned completely upside down. A new kind of power was coming from the West, and with it came the dawn of the Age of Empires. This new era was kicked off by an idea we call colonialism. And when you strip it all down, the motivation was pretty straightforward. It was all about controlling and taking the huge amounts of natural resources that were found in other people's lands. But just taking resources wasn't quite enough. That ambition started to grow, and it morphed into something bigger: imperialism. This wasn't just about wealth anymore. It was about power itself, about conquering territory and ruling over other nations. So here's the simplest way to think about the difference. Colonialism, that was about taking a country's stuff, its resources. But imperialism, that was about taking the country itself. One is about getting rich, the other is about total control and power. Which leads to a really important question. How did they do it? How did a relatively small number of people from Europe control these massive territories and populations? Well, they developed a very specific and often very brutal set of tools. They controlled pretty much every part of life. On the economic side, you had things like polo y servicio, which was just forced labor, or the culture system, which forced farmers to grow crops for export instead of food for themselves. And socially, they used policies like reduction to forcibly move entire communities, breaking up old social bonds to make people easier to control. And they had to justify all of this, right? And they did it with this powerful and honestly really disturbing idea that was captured in that famous poem by Rudyard Kipling. It was called The White Man's Burden. And it basically twisted this whole project of exploitation into some kind of noble duty, a mission to civilize the very people they were dominating. But as we see again and again in history, when you push people that hard, they eventually push back. And that brings us to the fight for freedom, a fight that was powered by a brand new idea that was spreading like wildfire: nationalism. This pushback wasn't just random anger. It was fueled by two really powerful things working together. First, you had spiritual faith, which gave people hope and the strength to keep going. And second, you had education, which gave them the ideas and the language they needed to challenge the empires on their own terms. And this combination of faith and education, it created some absolutely incredible leaders. You've got figures like Emilio Aguinaldo in the Philippines, Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam, And it wasn't just leaders, it was organized movements too. Everything from secret societies like the KKK in the Philippines to full-on armies like the Burma Independence Army. And they were all fighting for the exact same thing, the right to rule themselves. Now, it's really important to remember that independence didn't happen overnight. It wasn't one big event. It was a long, slow, difficult process that played out over decades. Freedom was won piece by piece, country by country, from the Philippines in 46 to Cambodia in 53, and all the way to Laos in 1975. But getting independence wasn't the end of the story. These brand new nations were born into a world that was already on fire with conflict. World War II and the Cold War that followed would leave their own deep and often painful scars on this new Asia. World War II was a total game changer. The region became a massive battleground, and the destruction was just immense. But here's the incredible irony. The same war that caused so much devastation also weakened the old colonial empires so much that it created the opening for the independence movements to finally succeed. But as soon as one global conflict ended, another one began. The Cold War came along and sliced Asia up with new divisions based on ideology instead of colonial borders. And probably the most tragic example of this was Vietnam, which was split in two, a communist North and a nationalist South, setting the stage for another generation of war. So, after all this, after a century of conflict from colonial conquests to world wars to civil wars, what's the one lesson that stands out? It's this simple but profound truth. Walang panolo sa digmaan. It means there are no winners in war. The cost is it's always too high for everyone involved. And that brings us to the final and maybe the most important question of all. Look, the whole point of studying a history like this isn't just to know what happened, right? It's to learn from it so we don't do it again. So when you look at the world right now, you have to ask yourself, which of these mistakes are we in danger of repeating?